We've all heard about large multinational companies dodging taxes, but do you know how much tax governments worldwide lose each year? Well, let's clear that up now. Our best estimates say it's $500 billion US. That's right, 500 billion to tax avoidance each year. In case that number is too big to imagine, here's a visual that might help. If $500 billion in $100 bills were stacked on top of each other, they'd reach 54,000 kilometers high. Bear in mind that the International Space Station is only 400 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. That's pretty high. In fact, less than 1/12 of this sum could pay for every child in the world to have a quality education, which is something we've already agreed to make happen by 2030. So it's not like governments don't need this money to fund public services like schools, hospitals, environmental protection, and the fight against poverty. That's the point of tax, isn't it? We can probably all agree that this needs to change. We need multinationals to pay tax. But how on earth has it gone on like this for so long? Well, transparency, or lack of it, is a huge part of the problem. Corporations go to great lengths to stop the public from seeing what taxes they are, and crucially are not, paying. By introducing transparency rules called country-by-country reporting, we can get a real picture of whether multinationals are paying a reasonable amount of tax. This simple idea is that large multinational companies would report basic information including the business activity they have, the profit they make, and the tax they pay in every country they operate in. That way, people like you and I would be able to check on a company's website whether they're really paying tax wherever they do business, or whether they are hiding their profits in tax havens. Transparency is not just good for citizens like you and I, it can help small businesses too. Currently, unlike their bigger counterparts, small and medium-sized businesses end up paying proportionately far more taxes. Estimates suggest businesses like your local coffee shop are probably paying as much as 20% more tax than some of the biggest multinational companies. So more transparency and more tax payments from big multinationals can help balance things out. But contrary to common perception, accountability is not actually harmful to large corporations. In 2015, the EU introduced more transparency for banks across Europe. There's no evidence to suggest this hurts profits. Research already shows this is making banks less likely to shift their profits to tax havens. But most importantly, public country-by-country reporting will help the people who need it the most, because the reality is the impact of tax dodging by multinationals is even more severe in developing countries. They depend more on corporate taxes to tackle poverty and support public services like safe public transport, quality education for girls and boys, and clean water. Yet poor countries typically lose even more to tax avoidance, and they don't have access to the same information about multinational corporations that European countries do. The solution becomes very clear. Transparency will help the world's poorest countries make sure all companies pay their share and inform citizens so they can make sure tax revenue is spent tackling poverty and inequalities. Right now, governments are discussing rules for public country-by-country reporting at EU level. And as you'd imagine, big companies and financial firms are lobbying to weaken the transparency efforts and add sneaky loopholes, and some European governments are on their side. But we don't need to let all this carry on. Across the world, people like you and I want our governments to end tax dodging. Let's remind them how much transparency matters for citizens in Europe and developing countries, as well as big and small businesses, and call on them to create change. Visit taxjusticeeurope.org to find out how you can take simple steps in your country to bring about real transparency and help end tax dodging.